This is the first video of a few videos that I will make for Arab World Music, IGCSE Cambridge. And today we're going to start with a little bit of general knowledge that you need in order to understand Arab World Music. Start with other students that summarized their work when they started doing their revision. Now the first candidate wrote here that we have folk music and it's mainly vocal. It's used to celebrate events in the lives of individuals and communities. And each ethnic group has its own folk music, which each generation learns by listening and copying. It does not have a wide range of notes, often not extending beyond a fourth or a fifth. So it sounds like pentatonic music, that's what I see there. Involves strong rhythmic patterns using hand clapping and drums. So there I see a characteristic of African music as well. Group singing in call and response style includes short melodic phrases often repeated. It's a type of a folk song, an epic song. An epic song, story poems performed by a solo singer and accompanied by a rabab, a fiddle with one or two strings. Epic songs kept alive stories of heroes and historic events, and poet-composers would compete with each other in the performances of verses made up on the spot. And a lot of ornamentation used in all the parts. So I already see a lot of characteristics that I find in African music as well. According to this first candidate, the ornamentation that you will find will be shakes, trills, grace notes, appoggiaturas, and tarkib, simultaneous striking of certain notes with a fourth, fifth, and octave. So that is a new word that we don't know. And the instruments that this person mentioned is the oud and the rabab. So it will be worth your while to listen to the oud and listen to the rabab. And then here is a very important word, maqam. In Arab classical music, the modes or maqam are the equivalent of Western scales. So I find in the Western music, I find for instance, in C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and I will say it's a major scale. And in Arab music, I will talk about the maqam. They have different combinations of tones and semitones and even include quarter tones. That's smaller than a semitone. In Western music, we know whole tones and semitones. If I write my major scale between 3 and 4 and 7 and 8, I have my semitones. And that is the difference between a major and a minor scale. Because in a harmonic minor, between 2 and 3 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, I know I have my semitones. But here I have quarter tones as well. So that's for us, I think, quite difficult to sing because we're not used to having quarter tones. No absolute fixed pitch. I also find that in African music that they start on a pitch that is suitable for them. Pitch of the tonic is chosen to suit the performers. So the note that they start on is set by the performance. And that I find in African music as well. The pitch variation in some of the intervals of the maqam or the melodies based on it as different musicians perform it in their own way. So I've got a variation in pitch. Okay? Octave is not divided into equal semitones. The Arab scale consists of 2 octaves. Now we know in Western music, if I have an octave or a scale, I play from for instance, the one C to the other C. So my scale is 1 octave. Now in the Arab scale, that's quite interesting. They have 2 octaves. A complete range of possible notes in the 2 octaves is called the yatval. So the 2 octaves together I call a yatval. And each octave is called a divan. So the yatval In a yatwal, I will find 2 divans. So a divan is like a Western scale. Arab melodies usually use a tetrachord or a pentachord. So out of those possible notes that I have in the 2 octaves, they only need tetrachord 4 notes, pentachord 5 notes. A tetrachord is 4 consecutive notes played in a chord. Da, da, ra, ra. At least the last one is a semitone. Da, ra. And a pentachord is 5 consecutive notes. Do, re, mi, fa, so. And then they have another word there. Half an octave is called an ayan. So it's easier if you make a little picture where you have for the 2 octaves quite wide a yatwal. Divide that yatwal into 2 to find the divan, and divide the divan into 2 to find an ayan. So the ayan is then 4 notes, and then they select a specific ayan. Okay, and if they need another note, they add the other note. The performance in heterophony. Heterophonic is when a group of musicians perform a melody together, but each play it slightly different. Okay, and for example, how they ornament it. So I will just correct that word there. You see, that is incorrect. So heterophonic, I can sing happy birthday, and everybody will sing it slightly different, and then it's heterophonic. But I still have the same melody, happy birthday. So I changed that word for us there. And heterophonic is a term that you have to understand for next time. Okay, so let's carry on now. And I think we will find another term that we have to remember. So now we have another new word, ikaat. It's rhythmical cycles. The rhythm of both folk and art songs is based on Arab poetry, which has a regular pattern. So when I read my poem or recite my poem, I have a specific pattern. Okay, and in Arab music, that rhythmical cycle is called the ikaat. There are fixed rhythm patterns or cycles called ikaat, which are used to accompany songs and other music. Like melodic modes, they all have names. Now, we're not going to study all the names. For the makam, so the makam is like a scale, but it's also a melody. So it's my scale is a makam. And the ikaat is another word that you have to remember. That is my rhythmical cycle. So that's the word now of this first candidate that summarized her work. Very important things, and I see a lot of characteristics that I also see in the African music. Now let's look at the word of the second candidate. Main characteristics of Arab music, mainly vocal. There is an important connection between Arabic language and music. It has always been used to recognize important events, such as chanting of the Quran. The singers or poets are given names such as Gawal or Shahir. I don't think that's quite important. Often group singing is done as a call and response. That's quite important and includes short melodic phrases that are repeated. Melody. Arab melodies are written based on Arabic modes, the makam. The texture, often monophonic. Rather, more attention is paid to ornaments and other subtleties in the melody. And the other one, we also saw that the texture is heterophonic. So you have to really carefully listen whether it's one voice singing and that it's monophonic, or whether they sing the same melody but different, slightly different, and then it's heterophonic music. The range. The other candidate mentioned that we have 4 or 5 notes. Let's see here. Does not use a wide range of notes, often using a tetrachord. We know that one was also mentioned with the first candidate. Pentachord, 5 notes of the makam. And the other candidate really explained that how the makam works. Rhythm, based on a rhythmic mode called the ikaat. Hand clapping and percussion instruments play them. And then the structure. The other candidate didn't mention a lot of the structure. The structure of a piece of Arab music tends to be complex. Arab music can be composed, improvised, or a mixture of both. I stand corrected. This candidate also mentions the makam, and I see the Arabic mode makam has the same meaning as the scales in Western music, only that each makam has a different combination of tones, semitones and quarter tones. There's no absolute fixed pitch, therefore the pitch of the makam's tonic can be changed. And he also explains the Arab scale is made up of 2 octaves. Okay, so that was the Yadval, and it's divided into 2 divans consisting of pitches of quarter tone intervals. The range of all the possible notes in that 2 octaves is called the Yadval. But like a Western scale, some notes are more important than others. In the Western scale, I know that my tonic, my subdominant, my dominant are quite important. The divan, okay, is divided into half octaves, anyas. And the melodies are usually composed using only one of these half octaves, the ayan. There are many different anyas, each with its own name. Now, what she summarized here is not important. The ascending notes are over 2 octaves. In this divan, there are 2 anyas, nawant and hiyas. That's not important. But this is important. Arab music is really written in notation. Okay? But to represent half flats in Western notation, the flat sign with a stroke on its tail is used. That's quite important. And like African music, that's also not written down. Now, this candidate showed you the instruments that you have to know. The ney is one of the oldest instruments in the world. It's an open-ended flute with 6 finger holes at the front and 1 thumb hole on the underside. It is made of 1 hollow reed. In Arab music, there are 7 neys of different keys. That's not important. You have to be able to hear the ney flute. And the oud, considered the king of instruments in the Arab world, the oud is a type of lute whose body is pear-shaped. This video starts with a picture of the oud. It is fretless and has 5 notes. Each note has 2 strings. Okay, so I think it will sound like a guitar. Okay, it's also 1 single bass string, which brings the total to 11 strings. The rabab is the Arab fiddle. Depending on the region, it may have 1 or 2 strings. So I think it will sound like a very, very rough violin, primitive violin. It has a membrane belly. There's normally no fingerboard. As such, the strings are stopped by the player's fingers. It makes a rich, thick sound with a combination of high and low pitches. So I also have a bow that I have to play with a bow on the strings. And then she also mentions the tabla drums. Let's look at the tabla drums. The tabla is hand drums, also known as the darbuka. It comes as a pair of drums with a higher and lower pitch. So if I look at those 2 drums, if I have a bigger drum, it will have a lower pitch. Okay? If I have a small drum, it will be a higher pitch. The high-pitched drum is always played with the right hand. The tabla is usually made out of wood. If we go to Indian music, we also have that black patch on that membrane. Okay, so when you go through this, go through all the important words that you see and that I mentioned, like the makam and quarter tones that we don't find in Western music, the instruments and the ney, the oud, the tabla, and the ikaat. So we have quite a few new terms that you have to know.